Shakur looked exceptional versus Teo. Elite skills, elite statement. Then he calls out Conor Benn. Big British brand, famous surname, Eubank Jr. rivalry, and America-ready marketing. Algorithm, that says yes. Money, buzz, clicks. But greatness, that says no. Benn's CV isn't elite, and Shakur risks a lot to engage in this. So what are you chasing? Payday or history? So why Shakur must avoid Conor Benn and chase greatness? Now, Shakur's performance against Teo was simply exceptional. But then after the fight, he calls out Conor Benn. Conor Benn has a massive British brand. What is that brand based on? Partly it's based on his father, who was a great British champion, and it's also predicated on his rivalry with Chris Eubank Jr., and also his style, which is fan favorite. He has a fan favorite style. Ruthless puncher, vicious, just like his father. And clearly they are trying to raise Conor Benn's profile in America. This will help his branding, because that means he's not just in the British algorithm, he's in the American algorithm. So from an algorithm perspective and from a monetary perspective, this fight makes total sense. But does it still make sense? Because, as I've stated, it's good for money, it's good for the algorithm. So how can it possibly be a bad idea? Well, think of it like this. You may go for a job and the job might be well paid. It might be better paid than your previous job. But if it has a bad culture, or it has a bad manager or bad colleagues, it might be objectively a bad job, even though there's more money. So for me, to put this back into the boxing context, the fight is the opposite path of greatness. There's like a capitalist path, a cultural path, a greatness path. Maybe the greatness and cultural path are together, but this is not a path for greatness. Think of this. Take away the money, take it away. Take away the algorithm, take that away. And what do you gain from a Shakur perspective? And here's a question. What is Conor Benn's credibility from a CV perspective? Let me elaborate on that. Of course, Conor Benn, from a certain standard, has credibility. He's a good boxer and he has a great marketing machine, and his performance against Chris Eubank Jr., you can make an argument for him, but what's his credibility in facing Shakur? Because having credibility to face Shakur, that's two different questions, and that's two different types of credibility. So this is not to disrespect Conor Benn. Conor Benn has done tremendously well. He's made a significant amount of money, and of course he has credibility, but does he have the credibility to fight Shakur? Here's another question that Shakur's team should be considering. How much have you got to lose and how much have you got to gain? If you have more to lose than to gain, then should you take the risk? Maybe you compensate the risk economically, but is it worth it? Because if the risk doesn't pay off, then not only do you lose with regards to your credibility, you also lose economically down the longer path, because it's not just the short window of money, it's the long form window as well. And when we say the long form window in boxing, we're talking about 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, etc. But then the question becomes, clearly, and every fighter, I guess, to a certain extent, or many fighters ask themselves this question, are you fighting for money or are you fighting for greatness? I guess many fighters, or many boxers, will state that they're fighting for both. They're fighting for greatness and they're fighting for money. Maybe some will just say the money. Maybe it's a subjective question, or it's a question that has different answers for different people. Now, going back to the credibility thing. From a credibility point of view, does Conor Benn deserve the opportunity to fight Shakur? Shakur, I think we can all agree after yesterday, is an elite boxer. Therefore, he should be fighting elite boxers. But is Benn, when we look at Conor Benn and we look at the resume of Conor Benn, is he an elite boxer? Is he really? If we're going to be negative, we would say that he fought a weight-drained Chris Eubank Jr. I think that's relatively unfair, because I think that he performed well in the first fight and he significantly improved his boxing IQ in the second fight. But if we're harsh, we say he fought a weight-trained Chris Eubank Jr.? If we're not harsh, we argue Chris Eubank Jr. is a good opponent, but was he a great opponent? So there's different ways to shape that. Of course, you have Chris Algieri, who's a good boxer. He's a good boxer, but was he not past his prime when he fought Conor Benn? So we've got questions with regards to Conor Benn's credibility or Conor Benn's eligibility to fighting Shakur from a boxing perspective. But here's another element. Let's introduce another element or another chapter into the book. I think the weight disparity between both could be extraordinarily significant. You could make an argument, or you could ask the question, could Conor Benn walk through Shakur because of the weight disparity? Of course, Shakur has elite skills. He's an elite boxer, but size matters. Think of this reference. Kell Brook versus Triple G. Kell Brook, I believed, had elite skills. However, against Triple G, because of the size disparity, Triple G was able to walk through him. Now, let's not get it twisted. Kell Brook landed a lot of punches, but effectively the weight difference was a massive factor in that fight. Of course, Triple G was a great fighter as well. And here's another thing. Will there be a rehydration clause in this fight? And if there is a rehydration clause, what is the premise of that rehydration clause? And if the rehydration clause is going to be in the favor of Shakur and not Conor Benn, which I assume would be the context, if Conor Benn comes into the ring with reduced power, this turns an intriguing fight into a bigger mismatch. Surely the fight against Shakur and Benn, the only variable to that fight is if Conor Benn's weight and power is significant, because their boxing IQ, respectively speaking, is not equal. From a boxing IQ perspective, Shakur is on another level to Conor Benn. In fairness, it looks like he might be on another level to everyone. However, as I always say, boxing is capitalism, boxing is entertainment. Entertainment and capitalism have a relationship. Conor Benn is a great marketing machine. Him and Chris Eubank were great dance partners. They've created economic momentum. They've created an imprint for the British public, which has transcended to the American public. In other words, Conor Benn brings in the money, or he brings in money because he is a massive brand. However, even though he's a massive brand, is this the right move for Shakur? And I think that depends on Shakur's perspective. What is Shakur's perspective? What is he chasing? Judging from what he says, it looks like he's chasing greatness, but it also has to economically make sense. And that's important because boxers, objectively speaking, have a small window of opportunity to make a lot of money. But if it's all about the money, then I think we get into the murky waters, because it should be about the culture and the money. Case in point, Canelo versus Terence Crawford. Of course, it was about the money. There was a lot of money, but there was a massive cultural significance and high boxing IQ competing against each other. So like I said, from my perspective, and I think from many different perspectives, particularly a boxing purist perspective, a fight against Conor Benn is not about legacy. It's about capitalism. And remember this, not all money is good money. So that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community. And I'm interested in your comments, I'm interested in your questions, and I'm interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, simply like and subscribe. And if you want to watch more content, click either here or click here. Now, thank you for your time. It is much appreciated. Peace.